Welcome. Thanks for joining us for our discussion. We're going to get started with a chat with Bill Wootton, who is with C3 Integrated Solutions, and Tom Neclerio with Conquest Cyber. So I'm going to stop talking and kick it over to Bill Wootton, the president of C3 Integrated Solutions, for his welcome. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Karen, and thank you for joining us today to talk about CMMC and how C3 and Conquest Cyber together can help you meet the challenge of CMMC. Trying to get the slide. So I'll be doing the front half of the conversation today, talking a little bit about CMMC itself, as well as our CMMC Readiness program, and then I'll be turning it over to Tom, who will talk a little bit about Conquest Cyber, their ARM platform, and be able to talk a little bit about some of the new features that are coming out in version 2. So for a little bit more of a formal agenda, like I said, I'm going to introduce C3 as an organization, talk about our partnership a little bit, CMMC. We're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft 365, which is really about the foundation in how you build a strategy to be able to tackle CMMC and get to a compliant state. That'll lead us right into our solution on the CMMC Readiness program and how Conquest Cyber's SCyOps fits in with their monitoring, management, and inspect portfolio. We should have a few minutes left over at the end of the session as well for questions and answers. So first, just a little bit about C3 Integrated Solutions. We're super proud to be celebrating our 10th year as a Microsoft partner. I was just on a call a little while ago talking about the history, everything we've been through, quite what the journey it's been for the last 10 years, and at the same time, just how much is in front of us and how much we're really just starting as an organization, and some of the strategic friends and partners we brought along the way, including Conquest, has been a big part of that as well. We're proud to say we have well over 250 clients that we support in Microsoft 365, and over 100 of those are defense industrial-based clients that are in the GCC High platform. We were honored when Microsoft came to us, and we were one of the first 5 partners that could support GCC High and sell licenses and support that platform without an enterprise agreement about 3 years ago. And what that has resulted in is a very deep experience working with the NIST standards, the DFARS clauses, and building strategies to go and tackle that and be able to meet that challenge. We look at ourselves as an industry leader, both in terms of thought leadership, but also from a practical standpoint. Last year, we teamed up with AvePoint to offer GCC High backup, third-party backup. We were the first ones to be able to do that. We were also the first to be able to offer a truly hosted voice solution with our partners over at Call Tower, and being able to enable those services, fill those gaps from the Microsoft platform. As much as it does well, there's always a couple of things that we can do better with that. Obviously, being part of the CMMC ecosystem, we're a registered practitioner organization as well. So I'm going to take a second to talk about the C3 Conquest partnership. A couple of years ago, we started doing some work together. We started working on various projects. And as Conquest started to put together their SCyOps program and the ARM platform, we were really excited because it filled a gap that was really sitting there in the marketplace. And one, frankly, we weren't ready to fill ourselves. Their security operations center, and combined with the compliance platform and the ARM capability, really fills a need in a way that most folks are not doing it today. There's plenty of SOC providers out there. There's plenty of compliance shops out there. Very few folks have found a really nice way and a clean way to integrate that. Additionally, Conquest is also unique in the fact that they're willing to talk about ITAR compliance and be able to meet that requirement. Most vendors out there kind of shy away from that a little bit. So when we were looking for a strategic partner in this space, when we were looking for someone to fill the security operations center need, Conquest was a natural fit for us. And Tom, I want to thank you for your partnership and everything we've been able to do together. And like I said, we're just sort of getting started with it. Now, before I jump into CMMC, I want to take a moment to just ask a quick polling question, get a little bit of a level set to see where everyone is relative to CMMC. So if you don't mind, go ahead and answer that question. Where are you in your CMMC preparation? Are you all good? Your POAM's complete, just waiting for the auditor? Or perhaps maybe the gap analysis is done and you're working on that POAM, trying to knock some things off? Are you building a strategy? Or are you like a lot of our clients when we first talked to them, where they're essentially hiding under the desk hoping it all goes away? Looks like a pretty stretch. It's good to see everyone out there honest about the POAM. I think there's only 3 companies now that have gotten through the DIBCAT assessment. So everyone's still working on that. We're still waiting to see really what a lot of CMMC is going to do, and it makes sense that a lot of folks are still waiting and trying to figure out how to get started. We're going to cover a little bit of that and hopefully give you a little bit of roadmap to move forward as we move on. So moving back into the presentation. At this point, we pretty much expect everyone has heard of CMMC, at least have a little bit of a foundation and understanding of it. We're not going to spend the whole webinar talking about CMMC. We're just going to do a couple of slides here to level set everything and set the stage for how we respond and how we answer to that. Obviously, CMMC is a new set of cybersecurity rules for the defense industrial base. It builds off of 7012 and NIST 800-171, and all defense contractors will need to be certified within the first 5 years or so of the program, and that's a population of over 300,000 companies. So this is a big shift from an industry standpoint. Probably also more relevant with President Biden's executive order about a month ago, all federal agencies now need to look at something that looks and feels like CMMC. We're going to watch that real closely. We're going to see how many of them adopt it or maybe do something similar. Either way, cybersecurity minimums are definitely coming, not just to the DoD infrastructure, but probably to the rest of the federal contracting base as well. CMMC itself went into effect via an interim rule on November 30th. We're still waiting for that final rule. Who knows when that's going to come? I'm not going to guess on that. If you've seen anything on CMMC, you probably know that it is 5 levels of CUI. You also know that the 2 most important levels are probably level 1 and level 3 at this point. CMMC has not talked much about 4 and 5. They're waiting to kind of get through levels 1 and 3 before they really tackle that. If you hold FCI information, then you're going to be a level 1, and that's going to be federal contract information that's in your contracts. That's already in the FAR clause. So if you're doing the 17 things that are in the FAR clause, you are already doing the 17 things for level 1. They are parallel. You're pretty much waiting for the audit to show up and do it. Level 2 is transitional, and level 3 is really where it gets interesting. If you're holding CUI data, anything is controlled unclassified information, you are going to need to meet a level 3 requirement. Now, what level 3 is all about is the NIST 800-171 standard, which is 110 controls, as well as another 20 that CMMC came up with. Those things are known as practices, and that can be anything from conditional access to security monitoring, security training, anything across those lines. Those are things that you do to your environment to be able to be secure and to meet those compliance requirements. What's interesting about CMMC is it does add on the layer of complexity with maturity, and that's where the processes piece comes in. So what CMMC is looking for is, do you have a policy in place, and then do you have a corresponding practice to enforce that policy? So if you say, for example, I'm only going to allow access to my system through a compliant device, then do you have the tools in place to make sure that all access from that system is from a compliant device? And they're going to look to see that those two things are in sync. That's where the maturity comes into play. This actually adds a lot of complexity. It's more than just doing a bunch of stuff. You've got to document it and then kind of live it and breathe it from a cultural standpoint. Now, when we look at how to approach CMMC, Microsoft 365 provides the right foundation for your strategy and how to go forward. There's a slide that we used in some of our decks which shows a bunch of different capabilities that Microsoft can support. There's somewhere around 46 of them now that you could theoretically or potentially use in supporting CMMC. Microsoft can cover all of them within the Microsoft 365 and the Azure platform. But one of the things to think about and to look at before you start moving forward is, what's the right version of Microsoft 365? If you look across the spectrum and look at the slide here, Microsoft 365 Enterprise, the one on the left side of it, that's the original commercial version. It's got hundreds of millions of users, and it lives and breathes in the commercial version of Azure, which is fine. It's a great program, fantastic platform. It also uses the EMS capabilities out of Azure Commercial as well. Now, what's important about this is, while Azure Commercial will accept U.S. data residency, they'll maintain your data will always stay within the continental U.S., there is a global support administration model. So that means any work that's being done on your environment more than likely, whether that's customer support or back-end administrative, is probably being done by someone overseas. So when Microsoft started selling to the federal government, they realized there were some additional requirements, some additional things they needed to do, predominantly in federal, state, and local capability. And they carved out a different version of Office 365 known as Government Community Cloud. And that was specifically to address some of the concerns of government regulators. This was also very successful, but as they started approaching the DoD, they recognized there was even more requirements that needed to be met, and most of those dealt with data sovereignty. So not only does your data have to reside in the US, it can only be accessed by US support administrative personnel. So whether that's customer support, back-end support, administrative support, it all has to remain in the US and be accessed by US persons. So as a result, what Microsoft did is they built a complete replica of Azure called Azure Government. And they've launched Office 365 DoD. So if you have Navy.mil, Army.mil, if you're not there already, that's probably where you're going as an organization to be able to meet your compliance requirements. Microsoft also figured out that there's a private industry component of that. The Lockheeds, the Raytheons, all the way down to the smallest of the contractors also have similar requirements around this data sovereignty, and that's how we got the GCC high. So there are important differences here, mostly around the data sovereignty. When you are in GCC high, you are getting both data residency as well as support administration. Now we can see this graphically when we look at or in a table format when we look at Microsoft compliance. If you're only aspiring to level 1 or 2, you can probably get away with commercial, but you have to recognize you're not going to be able to work with CUI. And what this is all about is, will Microsoft attest to the compliance at a certain level when you sit down with your auditors and they start looking upstream at your vendors, which they are starting to do? What's the right version of Microsoft 365 for the data you hold? Now, Microsoft about 3 months ago came out and they said in the GCC version of Microsoft 365, Microsoft will attest to levels 1, 2, or 3 in GCC with a caveat, and that caveat is still that data sovereignty. So that's why that's so important to talk about. Whenever we sit down with our clients, we're always asking them, do you have export control data, nuclear, no foreign, ITAR, anything in that category? That's going to push you into the GCC high cloud, because that's the only version of the cloud that Microsoft will attest to that data sovereignty component. Now, for us as an organization, when we're answering that call and trying to help our clients meet the challenge of CMMC, we're looking at really what is that challenge about. And I think we all know that the small to mid-market firms are really the most vulnerable out there. It's talked about ad nauseum, and it's really about the maturity, the resources, and the culture of those organizations. A lot of smaller organizations have underinvested in IT, certainly underinvested in cyber. Very few have documentation unless they've pursued some other standard like an ISO standard. And a lot of times when we work with a client, we'll find that their resources are also strained very thin. Very little IT staff, maybe no cyber staff. And as a result, cybersecurity is just not part of the culture of the organization. So we help work with that and we help them meet that challenge by leveraging this Microsoft Cloud, by leveraging Microsoft 365, usually in GCC high, sometimes in GCC, and also the Azure government environment as well. What this gives us is an incremental approach that allows us to put our clients in a firm foundation and add services as they are ready to add more and more capability. And this is really what the CMMC Readiness program is all about. It's about being technology forward. Most of the time when we get to an organization and they've underinvested in IT and they don't have documentation, we start with the technology. Let's get the right tools in place. Let's get you in a secure platform. So this graphic really sums up the way we approach our CMMC Readiness program. The whole idea behind this is, again, to go through that modular approach, to go sequentially, to get our clients first and foremost on a compliant version of the cloud. That's our deploy stage, where we're all about understanding what you have today, provisioning the right license types, doing the data migration, and getting you established on the Microsoft 365 platform. Next, in our secure phase, we're concerned with making sure that we're controlling access to the environment. This starts with not just MFA, but conditional access. With conditional access, we can do things like say, I'm only going to allow access to the environment from a US-based IP address or some other condition. Maybe it's a specific location. Whatever you determine from a policy standpoint, we can enact from a conditional access standpoint. Then we further secure the boundaries of the system with device management. Whether that's mobile devices or Windows 10 devices, we can go in using Intune, now Endpoint Manager, and configure the devices in a way to make sure that they're compliant with the CMMC standards, and then close the loop by saying, I'm only going to conditionally allow access to my environment with a device that is enrolled and compliant. And at that point, we've established a really strong system boundary. We've got you on the right platform, and we can move from more of a passive approach to security to a more active approach. And this is that defend phase where we turn on the threat hunting. A key component of zero trust is assume breach. And the way you counteract that is by actively monitoring and managing your environment with threat hunting, endpoint security monitoring, cloud app security, and then putting all of that information into a single source. In this case, we use Azure Sentinel as our security incident event manager. So you have one pane of glass for everything that's going on in your environment from a security standpoint. Once we get through that part, I'm sorry, I almost skipped governance. Governance is also a very key piece of this, because one of the critical pieces is not just security and environment, but controlling the flow of CUI data both inside and outside your organization. This is where we use techniques like data labeling, sensitivity labels, information protection rights, and workspace governance, so that we can enable secure collaboration and you have confidence that you know where that sensitive content is, both when it's inside and outside of your organization. Once we have that all established, then we move into a support type of phase with two components to it: monitoring and manage. I'll take that in reverse order. For us, manage is what's the right way for us to support you on an ongoing basis. Some of our clients take a couple of hours in a retainer type model, so they have kind of call a friend. If they need some help from an administrative side or building new policies, all the way up to the other end of the spectrum where we're essentially an outsourced IT provider and doing everything, including the remote monitoring and end user support for those clients. For us, we've got several tiers in between there, and finding the right fit to supplement your capability and make sure we're delivering you the right services on an ongoing basis. Now, the last piece of this is the monitor piece, and it's probably one of the most important pieces, if not the most important, because we do all of this work and someone's got to keep an eye on it. For us, monitoring is about that security operations center, having eyes on the glass, constantly being able to be aware and vigilant for all of that telemetry that's coming in through the system, to be able to detect, respond, and protect. And that part, we specifically carved out and made sure that we could work with Conquest and plug and play that component within our overall program. Again, as I mentioned earlier, as a strategic partner, most folks don't naturally link up that compliance and security operations center component. Conquest does that. It really gives them a true differentiation in the marketplace and allows us to kind of be able to support our clients in a way that most folks can't. So with that, I'll kind of wrap it up. I'll hand it over to Tom and let him get going.
Great, thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate it. So what I'm going to be talking about in the next 30 minutes or so is, number one, I want to talk about some of the challenges that we see as part of building a cybersecurity program, right? The challenges in the industry specific to the defense industrial base, some of the challenges in general to the general industry that we're seeing out there, and how armed our back-end SaaS product was really built to specifically achieve those goals of building and driving a continuous cyber program. My background, just a little bit about me, I am the SVP of cyber strategy for Conquest, as well as the internal CISO to the organization. I've been in cybersecurity for about 25 years now. Half my career really spent on focusing as a managed services capability of helping customers build and drive cyber programs, right, as an outsource provider, going into all types of regulated industries, understanding their unique risk profiles, what threats they're up against, and helping build unique cyber programs around that. In addition, the other half of my career, I've been in the hot seat myself, right? I've been a CISO of Fortune 500 organizations, and specifically in healthcare, focused on healthcare organizations, and felt the specific challenges that most CISOs are feeling today, really around some of the strategy and some of the organizational challenges that they're having. So this slide right here, I just wanted to kind of touch on. This is the top 6 that I see are really a challenge for most organizations I deal with. Anyone that I go into, from the defense industrial base through regular healthcare or critical infrastructure or banking, we all kind of have a similar threat profile or complexities that we're up against. Number one, it's around technology complexities. Throughout the years, most organizations, they get vendors come in from different security areas or IT areas and say, hey, buy my products. It's a silver bullet. It'll solve all your problems. And what we do is we tend to build up these technology complexities in the organization. And all these technologies have different logs, and all those logs send different data. And if those technologies aren't managed properly or aren't inherent to be able to talk to each other and share information and correlate information with each other, what it does is it causes what I like to call this fog of technology, right? Where we're getting more data than we can really comprehend. And what it does is it starts to mask the real threats, the real information in most organizations. So one of the things Bill was talking about was the ability from Microsoft, and one of the benefits of Microsoft and why we chose to kind of layer them as our foundation as part of our services is the ability for them as one vendor solution that is built from the ground up to talk to each other, right? So their security tool sets around the Defender suites were really built to talk to each other, share information, correlate data, and eliminate and reduce the technology noise and complexity in most organizations. Number two, you're all feeling it right now with the compliance and regulatory burden. Most organizations I go into, it's not just a CMMC that they're under, but it might be a research hospital, right? That's dealing with HIPAA regulations, and it's also because they're getting grants from the U.S. government are also under CMMC requirements. So most organizations are layered in the sense of their compliance and regulatory burden. It's just not just one or two, but many regulations. My specific case, when I was managing the CISO office for a large healthcare organization, we were a public company, so we were under SOX compliance. We were also healthcare, so I was under HIPAA. We had a medical billing practice, so I had PCI regulations. We had a research part of the institute, so we were under DFARS, and I had multiple regulations that I had to layer, and the complexities when you start layering multiple regulations and the requirements to satisfy those are a challenge in itself. Number three is really around time to detection. As an industry, we've been going the wrong way. Right now, I believe the current state is over 180 days for us to be able to detect something on our network. If you equate that to months, it's around 6 months of time frame for us to, from when someone clicks on a link or clicks on malware, it's sitting resident in our organizations for on average over around 6 months before anyone detects it. That is way too long, right? If you think about somebody coming into your house, robbing your house, or under your bed, sitting there for 6 months, you don't want them lying resident in your house for that long. So we as organizations have to find a strategy to reduce that time frame, have more visibility to what those threat profiles are, and be able to detect the specific threat profiles we're up against throughout a cyber strategy. On the right side, we talk about personnel shortages as probably the biggest issue of plaguing all industries. I think Bill touched on it in his slide as well. Most organizations have a very small security staff, if any staff at all. And if they're going out to hire, roughly there's about 4 million, I think, global positions that are in need from cybersecurity, about 500,000 or so in the US alone that are trying to get filled, that we have a shortage of talent and people. So that causes its own challenges in the sense that you can't find people, and when you do find people, typically they're not lasting very long because they're getting poached by competitors or other people that are offering more money. Then as a CISO, you have budget constraints, right? Making sure that you're fighting for every dollar. And me as a CISO specifically, it was really hard for me to justify or give back the metrics to the business to show that I was proving ROI for every dollar that I had budgeted. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about within the ARM platform was built in and around a lot of these security shortages. The last one is the involving hacker. When I first started in security, it was around protecting against what we call the script kiddie, the guy the kid that came home from high school and was scanning IP addresses and trying to do damage. Nowadays, it's around organized crime. It's around nation state actors, people that have full-time employees that are hacking organizations and are out there for a political or motivational gain. those types of people are drastically different, right? Because they typically don't stop until they have their target or their profile. They're after specific information. Where the defense industrial base comes in specifically is, these hackers are smart. They found that, the downwind effect of, now I can't get into the DoD specifically, but I can get into X, Y, and Z organization and move my way laterally up and what we call island hopping into higher profile networks. How this relates to the defense industrial base, as you see in the snapshot, and Bill talked about this, around 300,000 companies in the defense industrial base, but specifically most of these organizations in the defense industrial base is what we classify as small or medium-sized businesses. They're, as our poll said, a lot of them have not gone through any kind of CMMC readiness assessment yet. They're just beginning to start their cyber programs. And most of them are, I think, as our poll said again, are hiding under their desk hoping everything goes away. The solutions out there in the marketplace are also creating a challenge because most of these are built for the large public sectors, right? They're built for those large organizations and not necessarily suitable to small, medium-sized businesses. In addition, with meeting regulations, the small, medium businesses, because of what they are and their operating complexities in the government, they are subject to large private sector compliance, right? Getting 130 plus controls for CMMC level 3 in place is not an overnight undertaking. So most organizations out there in this defense industrial base are looking for outsourced providers that can help them, that can get them to a quicker path. And that's really where Conquest and our ARM product comes into play, because it's the ability for you to drive a cyber program from one pane of glass, going beyond just cyber operations, but driving your whole cybersecurity program from the aspect of not just compliance, because compliance is just one part of the puzzle, but maturity and effectiveness of the program to make sure that we can continue to repeat and move that program forward. So what that creates as a challenge right out there in the industry is most of these organizations are understaffed, they don't have the people, they don't have the budget. And what most organizations do is they go out there and they buy these piecemeal solutions, they buy, say, endpoint security, and think that's going to be the silver bullet and that's all they need to do. Also, a lot of them think that just going through and achieving compliance is also going to get them to a higher state of overall security. But you heard one of those analogies out there of really compliance does not equal security, meaning that if you're going through and just checking the box for CMMC and doing 130 controls without actually looking at your overall cyber program and your specific risk profiles. And I say that because risk to me is a very important part of driving a cyber program, and it's at the heart of what ARM and our backend platform is built upon. Building around risk and what's specific to your organization and the actual risk profiles that you're under are very important to start to build a unique cybersecurity program for yourselves. So I kind of equate this, it's kind of a hokey little analogy, but organizations like in medieval times, right, when you're building a castle with high walls and a drawbridge and a moat to keep all your threat actors away. But in reality, your main threat is somebody that can fly in on a dragon and come into your organization and bypass all your security. So a lot of organizations are taking that approach with risk, and risk is a foundational approach to all major regulations. If you look at PCI, HIPAA, all the other regulations out there, and also FARs, DFARS, and CMMC, there's a big component that's around risk management and having risk as a foundational element to drive your program. But most organizations just skip over that in the sense of they're trying to just throw darts at the problem without really understanding what the true intent of risk and where they need to be spending their dollars. So through the ARM platform, we spend a lot of time on building a correct risk framework and then helping you take that risk framework to drive other processes in your organization to drive your cyber program, which I'll explain in more detail in our version 2 release. So that's causing problems, right? They're taking a Band-Aid approach, which you've seen out in the industry, so many headlines around loss of money, even CISOs now being blamed for the attacks, losing jobs, even up to the board and C-suite level, where if they don't have right representation for security at their board level, there's some liability or potential drawback to that as well. So doing just enough is not what we're after, right? We want to, if we're going to be spending the dollars and building a cyber program and doing this for compliance and CMMC, we want to make sure we're building it not just to the compliancies, but also to the maturity and effectiveness to drive the program forward. Just some quick stats, 2 out of 3 surveys, companies reported cyber incidents. Most of those, about 43%, were small to medium-sized businesses. So those are the ones that are continually hitting the news around being the target of attacks, because for an attacker, they want the weakest link in the chain. They want something that's not going to be easy. People that aren't monitoring their networks, don't have logs, they can't be traced back. And those are the, unfortunately, those are the small businesses that are getting targeted. The average operational disruption per incident is roughly about a day's time, right? Over 18 hours. It doesn't seem like a lot, but to have your critical business operations down for 18 hours, you can see what the potential financial, reputational, strategic business impacts that those have across your organization because of that outage. And then the cost of a typical malware or web-based attack or even ransomware attack is costing upwards around 1.4 million for organizations now. And global losses, as I mentioned, cybercrime, nation-state actors, even the threat to the government side of the house with loss of plans and central intelligence is costing over $1 trillion in global losses in an annual basis. So this is a real issue that's plaguing our industry. And what we've done is try to help organizations build that and have a quicker point to a solution through the ARM platform. One quote I want to share with you on this slide is from Accenture. Accenture says, security should be a core competency across the organization and embedded in all that a business is and does. From people to data to technologies, every aspect of business invites risk. So when we start talking about security, the term risk becomes almost transparent to it or in line with it in a sense where risk is a fundamental component of a security program. We need to understand what our business risks are before we can start building an effective security program. Relating this back to CMMC and how this affects the actual CMMC regulations specifically, and again, I think Bill touched on this a little bit. CMMC is built on two sides of the house, right? One is the CMMC practices, which means at level 3, which is not even building a comprehensive cyber program, but building what they call a good cyber hygiene. The 130 controls is really helping you just build a basic cybersecurity program, right? A program where you can effectively protect CUI. But building that from day one on the practices is only part of what CMMC requires. The other side, on the right-hand side, is really around the CMMC processes, meaning that for keeping a program moving along and keeping it in compliance, you have to show a lot that the program is effectively moving forward without control drift or failure to meet those controls. So building it from day one is not all you have to do. It's also documenting the policies. So number one, at level 1, it's around performing, right? Being able to perform that process repeatedly. So when an auditor comes out and looks at you for C3PAO, number one thing they're going to want to look at is, can you show that that process is something you can repeat for consistently as a 3-month process, right? Sampling data, looking at data over 3 months and understanding, is it something you can perform? Number 2 is around, do you have the right documentation to show maturity? Do you have the policy document or procedure document that states those requirements in there and the way you're doing that process? So as you get to level 2, it's starting to document that. And then level 3 is, how do you manage that? What is the typically around the review periods, or how are you monitoring that control to make sure that the control is remaining effective? So when we look at ARM, we start to build programs at level 3 to build all those controls you need to not just show practices are being met, but all the evidentiary requirement for the continuous monitoring part of your program is also being met as part of this solution. So ARMS, again, I talked a little bit about ARM is our backend proprietary-based product. It's a SaaS-based product to help customers get, with a risk-based approach, be able to manage a cyber program from one pane of glass. Our goal is to get it down to, we're working on even a phone app for users just to see on a daily basis, for a CISO to understand at the fingertips of my organization, what are the tasks I need to do to drive my cyber program for the day? And that's our goal and objective, is All the other solutions out there I've seen to date are really about point solutions, right? It's, you know, driving one area of cyber program or driving another area of cyber program. ARM really takes everything you need as part of building a program and maintaining a program and puts it into one single pane of glass. And that's something I'll show you as well in the second half of this. We want to, as part of this, give the tools back to the organization to identify and tailor cyber program, but also maximize ROI. At the end of the day, you know, we know that CISOs or people running cyber programs have limited budget. So we want to make sure when you're using that budget, you're using it wisely on the solutions that are going to give you the most maturity and effectiveness gain for your cyber program. So part of the ARM backend platform is building out those cyber roadmaps, the things that are going to prioritize what elements that if I add to my program are going to give me the biggest maturity and compliance gain to my program for the ROI I have to spend on it. So it's helping organizations prioritize, make sure that they're spending the right dollars, but also we're using automation in the sense of what we call technical workflows, utilizing the Azure Microsoft backend as a foundation to take out the technology or take the technology and feed it into the platform to help automate some of those controls and validations or proving out that that control is effective so that even beyond level 3 maturity for CMMC, some of our technology controls can even go into 4 and 5 because you can show automation that the control is being done for you, right? Maybe pulling an Active Directory list on a quarterly basis so that you can review it or somebody in your organization has the review authority to make sure that terminated users aren't sitting on that list. So it's making the processes easier so that you might just have 4 or 5 tasks for the day to keep your cyber program in check. So we're doing a lot of that with the backend tools as well. And number 2, or the last one, is maximizing the use of security tools. So yeah, you've invested a lot in the Microsoft foundations or potential cloud foundations and the security tool sets within those. So we want to make sure after we build those foundations and those elements is to make sure that those tools are continuing to operate and function properly. And then lastly, as your risk profiles change, right, as new attack vectors come out, for instance, the Colonial Pipeline, right? Being able to serve up that new risk profile and see if that has actually changed or affected your business in any way. And does that ultimately change the controls or things you need to continue to drive your program? So what we've done is built the Adaptive Risk Management, which ARM stands for, right? The ARM acronym is Adaptive Risk Management Executive Dashboard. It's adaptive risk management, meaning that a cyber program is not static. It's always changing. It's changing constantly within minutes, within hours. We have to adapt to that change in risk, right? We need to make sure that we are adapting our controls and everything in the program to meet that. So ARM was built to help satisfy that. Number 1, built on cloud technology, right? Leveraging your investment, what you've already invested typically in this cloud technologies, and helping make sure that the deployment is staying in a compliant state, but also wrapping good cybersecurity around the modern components, the compliance, and the effectiveness that you need to continue to drive that program forward. So here's how it looks like from a foundational component, right? So if you break down on the left-hand side, if you break down the 130 or so controls around CMMC, through the portions of the pyramid on the right-hand side, you'll see that we build ourselves on the foundation of Microsoft Azure Gov, Microsoft 365, GCC High, or even the commercial cloud, depending on where you need to be. But building ourselves on the Microsoft foundation first and foremost to be able to drive a lot of the tool sets, a lot of the strength that Microsoft gives you as part of their operating suite. And then partner C3, that can help you secure and build that effectively. Right? I've gone to so many customers that don't have the right partner in place. They buy all these technologies and tools and only properly configure roughly 10% or 12% of that tool set. Right? Through C3, they're going to make sure that you're configured properly from day 1 to build that foundation at level 2 to make sure that your cloud is securely built. Right? That from day 1 you are built to meet to a level 3 CMMC compliance. But getting that program to a state and time, a point in time where it's compliant is not enough, right? It's getting beyond that of how do I operate that environment moving forward, show the continuous monitoring and the progression of the program where we're not going to slip out of control drift. That's really where the ARM platform and the Conquest services come into play, where we're layering a level of strategic cyber operations, as we call it, where we're helping with the monitoring, potentially the management of the security components within the actual cloud environments, and helping you maintain those control sets, those configurations, whatever you need from us as part of the ongoing maintenance of that operation. Utilizing those feeds into the ARM platform to show the statistics and the metrics of how those controls are operating. And then at the last level of the pyramid up above is the adaptive compliance program. Layering in those GRC folks or those compliance folks that understand how to drive a continuous monitoring program to make sure that you have and are continuing to collect all that the evidentiary collection that you need as part of proving out your program. So at the end of the day, when an auditor comes out, they can simply just log into ARM and see where your program is, right? Be able to have all that evidence they need for their C3PO audits as part of CMMC level 3. So up within all of our solutions with C3 and Conquest, we can get customers roughly to about 86% or so control coverage under a full solution set. Meaning that the only things that are outside typically are physical security or things that might either be inherited by Microsoft or inherited internally, like wireless security, paper-based CUI, things that we can't do because it's not part of a cloud foundation. So what we do there is layer our adaptive compliance program over that as well to help you collect that documentation or build those policy and procedure sets so that you can prove out the remaining 13 or so controls that are outside. So we built a solution where it's I hate to say it's an easy button, but it's a quicker way to gaining compliance versus trying to go out there and build a program by itself. So for all of you people out there that kind of answered that poll that you're just in the starting phases or you're hiding under the desk, now's the time to come out and just start to understand how Conquest and C3 together can start to build you to a quicker state of compliance. How do we do that, and how does ARM really achieve this? So what we do is we start at the base level of understanding, number one, your overall business strategy. Each organization has different strategies, different objectives, and when we layer into our product, we layer 837, which is the risk management framework from NIST. Meaning that we do 3 tiers of risk evaluation across your business. Number one is at the strategy level of what is your key components, what is the business strategy and your risk tolerances around financial and operational risk. We take those strategies and build it to a tier 2 and tier 3 profile, which is around understanding your key business processes and your critical assets and inventories. Once we have that risk profiles, we can help you start to drive strategic tasks within your operations, your engineering, and even building out through the compliances of those documentation and continuous monitoring you have to do. So ultimately driving through to a customer experience at the end where you're able to achieve a program with less resources, less time, and a quicker status of doing it if you're going to operate it yourself. So the main outcomes really are around the scalability, right? As you grow your program. So the big key here is, you can be a 2-person shop or a 0-person shop. Our services and our platform is built to scale with you. So if you only have a few elements, or if you're only building the CMMC level 1 right now, we can build that, make sure and monitor that program for you, make sure that that's compliant. And then when there's a need to go to CMMC level 3 or higher, or any kind of growth in your program, we're there to grow with you as part of this platform. So don't be shied away that this is too much of a program for you. We've kind of skimmed it back to basic cyber hygiene in a limited state as well. So this platform is adaptable for anybody out there. Number 2, it does increase the ROI. It reduces waste and spend by helping you prioritize on those tasks that are going to increase your maturity and effectiveness. Gives you a big time saving, the ability to manage a cyber program in a fraction of the time, as I mentioned. The unparalleled protection of not just the cyber operating state of, say, the Microsoft Foundation below it, but also the Conquest Cyber operations and the SCyOps on top, as well as C3's ability to protect and control that environment from an initial build perspective as well. Reduces the tech complexity, so gets all those other elements out of the organization, so we can really peel back the layers of the onion and see what the root risk and the root security issues are as part of that security operations component. And lastly, we build in automation everywhere we can to reduce the reliance on cyber staffing, since there is such a shortage in the industry. Not to say that you don't need cyber staffing, but it reduces the abilities, to start doing and running a program with one or two people, in the sense of somebody just looking in on the status of the program on a regular basis. So now I'm going to switch over to kind of provide a demo of the ARM platform. So this is one of the areas where I want to kind of show you. We just released a version 2.0 in the last few weeks, which is basically a huge overhaul of our front end and back end platform. I'm going to walk you through kind of the strategy we take some of our customers on when we start building the cyber program with them, and kind of show you how that moves along the progress of building a cyber program. So this is our ARM 2.0 platform. Again, as I mentioned, we just released this a few weeks ago. I'm very happy to say we've gone through a lot of pains in getting this out to make sure that we can have this out for a lot of our CMMC customers, making sure that they're getting full aspect of the new features. So the first thing you'll notice when you log in here is, the backend platform, number one, was built for DFARS, ITAR compliances, in the sense that, Conquest is all US-based citizens. We are built around the foundation, going through our FedRAMP moderate, as well as looking at a FedRAMP high environment for our placement of the ARM platform. Building into the controls, even with the actual login to the portal, it's all multi-factor authentication to make sure that we have the control sets to protect your data. But at the end of the day, when you log into this platform, the first thing you want to see, or you're going to see, is your overall cyber status, in the sense of, we built the foundation of it built on NIST CSF, which is the NIST cybersecurity framework. The reason we did this was it's more of an independent regulation, in the sense of NIST CSF was built for critical infrastructure, right? All the organizations that have a play in critical infrastructure, it was a generalized framework that allows us to go through the basic profiles of building, identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, recover to risks in a typical system. What we want to do with you as part of our program is work with you to build out your current maturity profile, which is what you're seeing in green, right? In a scale from 1 to 5 in all of these areas, we build out where you are today and look at what your target maturity state is, where we want to be, either compared to where you are now or where your industry lies. So we're kind of building towards, what is that future? Where do we want to drive to in the areas of maturity of all the CSF? One of the new features in 2.0 is building out all of the cyber alerting that you need as part of driving a program. So you'll see the cyber alerts on the right-hand side. This is for my specific profile as I log in. If somebody had a different roles or responsibilities, they come in and see different alerts or things that they might have to take care of for the day. So you'll see that it's broken down into different areas. Number one, our first alerting is around risk awareness. So if there's something around my risk profiling or my threat profiles that change for the day, say a new threat actor came out, or something that I need to review, or a vulnerability came out for the system that I need to look at, I can simply click on this and review that alert or that vulnerability for the day. Number two is around strategic defense actions that I might need to take to continue to protect my program. This lies, and it's a direct relation to our defend module, where I can see my current state of my NIST CSF controls, understand where my roadmap is, and build towards mapping to those 51 controls that I might not have. We prioritize those based on maturity and effectiveness for you guys to be able to, again, the ROI spend, to make sure that you're spending the right dollars in the right place. So these strategic defense actions, if I looked on these and review these actions, wait for these things to come up here for a second, and build this out. There we go. So now I can see these are the strategic actions in a prioritized order that I would need to do. So number one, the biggest gain is for me to build out my information security roles and responsibilities, making sure that I have strategic, CRM or cyber risk management roles identified for my security people. In addition to that, we have strategic compliance actions. These are actions you might need to do specific to, say, CMMC or HIPAA or other regulations that you're up against. And maybe it's evidentiary collection or reviews that you need to do as part of the continuous monitoring process for the program. Lastly, or down below, is around operational awareness. So this is around cyber operations. These are specific security operations cases that might be worked on, or specific threats that are being responded to by our security operations center that you can review and look into. So if I open the active cases, I can see all of the security incidents being pulled from Azure Sentinel in this instance, and what analyst is working on it and what they're doing with it. I can click on that case, and I can see the actual details, the case timeline, any notes associated with that case that are going on, and what analysts are doing in real time. So when I come in and we build this up, but that essentially is your one go-to dashboard, right? So every user that logs in gets a specific dashboard based on their alerts and their profiles that they're looking at. But when I go into the actual setup and setting up the organization, there's a few specific keys that we want to make sure that we're building to. Number one is around risk assessments, and I'll go into that in a second. But the second most important thing here is assigning what we call CRM program roles, or cyber risk management roles, security roles. So I've already filled out a few here, right? A few users in my organization, like Sally Jones is our, she handles our compliance, our governance, and our risk, right? So she has an assignment to that. Tricia Hill is our pen tester, vulnerability analyst. And Mike Smith is our cyber defense analyst, or somebody that's doing incident response and forensics. In a smaller organization, we might be assigning all these roles to maybe 1 or 2 people. But what this does is it allows us to create workflows based on these roles and responsibilities to show when there's an action needed, right? So if I'm a cyber defense analyst or this forensics analyst, and I have some alert in the SOC module, it's going to make sure that when I'm building out my cyber communication plan, which is over in the SOC settings, if I come in here and I build out my communication plan, I can see that the Security Operations Center is going to reach out to Mike Smith because he is an IR member. He has those cyber roles and responsibilities. So one of the keys to doing that is building out our cyber program roles. The other thing we want to do is when we build out our cyber program, I talked to you about the current state of cyber maturity as well as the future state. So we want to kind of set our profiles of where we want to be. Where does the organization want to be as far as maturity on our CSF profiles? So that allows us to kind of get a future state and drive to a future state of where the program should be heading. In the areas of inspect settings, we want to also identify what's your default framework that we want to look at. We can overlay multiple frameworks. In this sample portal, we just have HIPAA and CMMC enabled, but you imagine all the other compliance frameworks and the ability to kind of check through those. CMMC, you can set it at whatever level we're trying to achieve. CMMC level 3 for this instance. And that's the basic setup. There's not a lot to it, right? And once we do that, we can start now building out the actual program. Number one, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but building out a risk profile is, as I mentioned many times earlier in the presentation, is important, not just to me, but important to driving a program. So we can go through and build out the initial risk assessments and risk framing of the business. I just did a risk frame not too long ago, where I built out an organizational view. So number one, you go through and you build it out from what are the organizational goals, objectives, the risk, and then tie it down into, of those organizational goals, what are the mission and business processes that are supporting that? So I could have a mission and business process that's my financial system, or my my key financial system. And at the third level, the tier 3, it's when we get down to the individual assets. So IP addresses, things that are supporting or part of that actual business process. Now that doesn't seem too complex, but when we get down to it, what that allows us to do is, as we get down to the business process level and the actual IT asset level, we can start affecting a lot of workflow throughout the other areas of the portal. For instance, take any kind of cyber program element like vulnerability management. When I get to the ability to start ranking my critical processes and the assets that are associated with those processes, I can say, because the accounting system is so critical to me, and there's 20 assets that make that accounting system run, those assets are all inheriting that critical element from our business process. Meaning that when I do vulnerability management, I can drive workflow to that to say that my patch management or vulnerability management on those critical assets needs to drive to a 0 to 3 hour or 4 hour patch time. So in the areas of cyber incident response and security operations center, we have in our cyber operations component, we have what we call our incident response matrix, where I can drive cyber risk or cyber response in what we call a risk-based response, where I understand the device is critical to the business because it's part of the accounting program, and a critical event comes in on that, I can assign a risk score of a critical asset with a critical threat coming into it of a 12, and have an SLA that's associated with that, a risk-based response, versus that same low, so say a same low asset, something that's not critical to me, has that same critical event happening on it. It might get an event response of 6, meaning I don't have to respond to it as quicker. So just things like that, little flows like that that are risk driven. They start with our risk assessment. Once we prioritize our assets and those risks, we can start driving actions to help facilitate and automate the cyber program within it. So I've been jumping around a lot here, but in the area of risk assessment, I want to show you the ability for us to go in, where is it? Sorry, risk assessments here. Sorry, I went to the wrong area. Drop into our risk assessment. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Carver scoring, this is our way to take a subsystem like a commercial operations, our end users, or federal CUI, our system boundaries, right? So I might have a commercial boundary, I might have our federal CUI boundary that's protected by Azure, and that boundary is a critical element to me. That critical element is associated with all of my assets below it, and I can start to drive decisions to those assets. And that's really where the risk framing portion of our ARM platform comes in. The next module, once we have our risk portion of the business aligned, we can start to now go into the defend module and see where our current cyber state is in all these areas of identify, detect, respond, and recover. And then down below is that list that I was referring to earlier of those strategic defense actions that I can implement as part of the program that are going to give me the highest gain, maturity, and effectiveness gain to drive my program. So we want to kind of start at the top and build that as a short-term, long-term project plan to be able to get the most ROI for our budget spend. So in an instant here, if there's abilities like cyber threat intelligence is one of the 4th or 5th things here that I might need to do. So if I was going to justify to my executive level that I need to go up and sign for these information or threat intelligence sites, and there's a cost to that, I can show them the ultimate cyber maturity gain and things that I'm getting from the program because I'm spending that dollar. So it gives us the ROI back and shows the ROI from that spend on part of that security organization. One of the big areas I wanted to concentrate on for the 2.0 release is our inspect module. The inspect module is specifically built to drive past not just NIST CSF in our foundational core, but overlaying specific regulations that you might have as part of your program. This one was built out for CMMC level 3, as we saw in the settings. And it has the 17 control families that allows you to see your current state of where you are with those implemented controls. So if I went into access control here, the first module, let this load for a second, it'll step me through all of the evidentiary requirements that I need to do to, number one, initially validate that that control is working, and then providing me the ongoing continuous monitoring things that I need to do to keep those controls in place. So once I build this out and get everything to 100% from a state and time, it goes into more of the continuous monitoring mode where I might log in one day and this drops from 100% to 83. And I can see why did it drop from 83? Oh, I missed my annual review of my maintenance policy. And because of that, it dropped my control effectiveness in one of the areas because I didn't have that in place. Or John was on vacation and didn't get to that control set. And now my compliance I'm out of compliance in one of these areas. It allows us to get in front of the auditors, making sure that we don't have any missteps before the audits come out. But what it's also doing is allowing us to collect all this evidence in one area. So when the auditor does come out, they can see everything and review everything. We've built all the evidentiary requirements you're going to need from a maturity aspect in the sense of, remember when I was talking about the ability to, when I add evidence, I want to be able to understand or show if the evidence is a policy, if it is if it's an implementation evidence, or what type of evidence it is. So if I go, I'll show you back on this one. Actually, it's a little easier. When I go into identify, right, and I go into my evidentiary collection, I can see that number one, is it a policy, which means I can, or at level 1, is it implemented, right? So that would be a level 1 control where I can show a screenshot. At a level 2, if I have a policy developed, it's going to get me to a level 2 of maturity. And if I can show some management and measurement over or a review period, I can show that at a level 3, I'm achieving all 3 of those required evidentiary collections at that control to show it. So we've pre-built all the requirements from, you need an asset inventory list, screenshots, whatever that is. You need to upload your asset management policy, and you also have to review your device inventory list on a quarterly basis. When we build this out, we can assign the roles to the CRM role that we built earlier when we were configuring to that person, that when this quarter comes up and the review period comes up, they're going to get an alert saying, hey, please log in. You've got to look at your review, your device inventory as part of your continuous monitoring. So all the workflows are in here to make sure that you can easily keep up with all of the requirements that are part of an ongoing CMMC program. So this is, again, the inspect module. The ability also in this is we pre-built all of the policies and procedures for you. So when we talk about asset management, things around cryptographic, data classification, endpoint, all those things come into play. So we built out a lot of the policy elements for you. So either you can utilize these policies, build them into your existing policies, append those, whatever you need to do, and then ultimately the procedures that drive them. So if Conquest is doing the controls for you, or if you're inheriting controls from us, we will be satisfying that evidentiary requirements for you. Right? We will be doing the part of that for you, so that if you're outsourcing 86% of your program, a lot of that stuff is on us to make sure we're collecting the documentation and reviewing that, making sure it's in here for you. But all these policies, procedures, or the roles and responsibilities for these policies are built out based on the CRM roles that we're building in the configuration section. Let's see, the last element I was going to show you in our 2.0 release is our full SOC module. I kind of built into this as well. You can see these in several different areas, but this is our cyber operations, helping you monitor, doing all the incident response and detection component of part of that CMMC program. So for instance, I can click on the actual alert. I showed you the case timeline and all the notes associated with it. I can also interact with the analyst, right? So if I wanted to come down here and send a SOC request, I can interact with the analyst and see what's going on. We have a built-in incident response plan, so that we have our custom communication plans of escalations of who needs to be notified when. All that stuff is built in as part of the cyber operations component. The next module I'm going to talk about real quick is really our Overwatch module. This module is actually in development, but it came back to us as an area we wanted to develop because of such the demand for the supply chain risk and the subordinate or flow down requirements from prime contractors to subcontractors. Or you as an organization, you outsource to a lot of service providers. So this module, as part of our next release, is going to allow you to build out your service providers, if it's C3, if it's Conquest, if it's any other providers that you're doing, and have a look into their cyber program from the way that ARMS sees it, to be able to kind of give a view and make sure that you're doing your flow down requirements as required. We also have organizations that might acquire organizations or have subordinate entities as part of their corporate structure that as a CISO, I might be responsible for, but I might not have full visibility or fillability to affect. And I've had that as part of my roles and responsibilities before, where we were acquiring organizations and companies all the time, and the business said, hey, just let them operate, but we got to do our due diligence on them. So having something like this would have helped me significantly, where I could drill down into their cybersecurity, understand their profiles, but kind of keep an arm's length as we need to. The last module I want to show you in 2.0 that released is our ARMS room. And this kind of ties hand in hand with our defend module as you're going through your cyber roadmap and understanding what are the key cyber maturity gains, things I can do to add to my program. Some of those might be vendor solutions, technology solutions, even conquest solutions that you have to go through. So the arms room kind of lets you go through different areas of the organization or different modules and understand if I start adding cyber operations or an XDR component, add on to my organization, how is that going to overall affect my cyber compliance and effectiveness, and easily let you acquire that throughout the system itself. So if there's custom templates, custom endpoints, things I need to add, like for this example right here, I might want full visibility, right? For example, CMMC says you must detect malware on your endpoints. So one of my deficiencies here in my defend module is going to be that you don't have anything that's currently looking at your endpoints for malware. You might have endpoints or malware protection on there, but you don't have the monitoring component to actually view that or alert to it. So I can simply enable that or enable those features, or even around the ability to have spam protection and protection of my email infrastructure as part of CMMC requirements. Those things I can easily enable through the arms room and see, number one, how that affects my cyber maturity and effectiveness, but also the easy way to deploy those to add onto your system as well. So as you can see here, ARMS is very valuable for the ability to daily drive your cyber program and kind of affect the inner workings of your cyber program. As an output, the reports section is pretty comprehensive in the sense of I can print out a full tier 3 risk assessment from here. I can show all of the sections of the 17 control families and the status of the controls in a simple report for my auditors. I have a POAM that I can pull from all of the defense actions that I don't have implemented yet. I can pull my system security plan as well. As well as in the SOC area, all of my cases, all the investigations, everything that's been going on as part of my program. So there's a lot of information here to drive and continue to drive your cyber program from one place. So that's kind of the summary, and I'll kind of wrap it up here.
I guess the last thing I wanted to make sure that we mentioned was the Sea Air Space show that the Navy League is doing at the beginning of August. Both Conquest Cyber and C3 will be there and be exhibiting. So if you are attending the show, be sure to stop by and say hello to us. We'd love to put a name with a face and all of that good stuff now that we're able to do that once again in real life. So thanks so much, Tom and Bill as well. And thank you to all of our attendees who took some time today to come out and listen to the webinar. And like I said, we'll be sending a link to the recording and then also the question and answers that we weren't able to get to in the next day. And you'll be able to review those both at your leisure. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.